We'll get started in a brief moment. So if you have a heat pack in the microwave and think, oh, I really should get that, go grab it now. That way you can settle in, ready for a lovely night here, which is so lovely. It's a nice night here. I've still got my fan going full pelt because
Yeah.
it's still a bit warm, but
Love it.
that is okay. Awesome. We'll give everyone a few more moments. There's still a few more joining in. For anyone who can't make the session tonight, we have recorded this. So at the end of it, pending my IT skills, we will make this part of the Manage Endo program as well. Hilary also has another session on there as well. So really cool. All right. So let's kick off. Hi, everybody. My name is Ash, and I am here with QENDO, and we are bringing this education session to you all because we thought, and we had so many people contact us and say, hey, we really want to understand sexuality and pelvic pain and how the two go hand in hand. So before we kick off today, I just want to do an acknowledgement of country. We'd like to thank the traditional custodians and acknowledge them and for providing the land that we meet today. We would also like to pay our respects to elders, past and present, and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people here today. We would also like to thank the many leaders, tribes, people, and organisations who have spoken about the issues and topics we face today for decades. The work we are doing here builds on their legacy, their dedication, and their advocacy that has preceded us. So thank you to those who are joining us. Thank you. I'm going to introduce you to the lovely Hilary, Dr. Hilary
Hello.
Lindberg. Now, she'll probably give you a better overview of how she does and what she does in terms of her practice. But Dr. Hilary here is here. She is a clinical psychologist and a sexologist. And tonight she's going to take us through sexuality, pleasure, and pelvic pain. So, how tonight will work is Dr. Hilary will go through her lovely presentation here. And if you have any questions as we're going through, we do have the Q&A feature enabled. And now that everyone is out of the waiting room, I can turn the chat on as well. So you can message me any thoughts. I'm very well aware of webinars and people needing to get their thoughts out as they think of them. So feel free to send me a chat as you think of it, and I can address it at the end. So without further ado, Hilary, over
Thank
to you.
you. Thank you. Yes, so I can't see everyone's faces. I'm assuming everyone is, maybe it's my view or something, but so sorry if I'm not being able to look at you or see your face as I respond. I'll be just talking to my computer, but nonetheless. So yeah, my name's Hilary. I'm a clinical psychologist and one of the directors at the Centre for Relational and Sexual Wellbeing. We are a private psychology and counselling practice in Brisbane and work with individuals and those in relationships around sexual health, sexual function, difficulties, chronic health conditions, mental health, relationship challenges, etc., etc. And I have done a graduate certificate in sexology to kind of further my interest in sexual health and function, and work a lot with those who experience pain with sex, and libido or desire challenges, and trauma or medical trauma. So, when I was thinking about what would be helpful for us to think about tonight, I kind of thought that we would have a little look first around like sexual pain and endo and the common, like how common those occur. Look a little bit about when I'm thinking about, which I'm aware now actually isn't in my overview here, when I'm thinking about the treatment or working with those who experience sexual pain, what are the goals that we're working towards there? And then I was wanting us to have a little look about sexual myths because they're the things that underpin everything. Look at some models around sexual resilience and sexual flexibility. Have a little rethink about desire and arousal from evidence-based sexual education, not from Cosmo or, some other pop culture reference. And then think, okay, well, with all of that in mind, what is good sex and how do we actually define good sex? How we look at if we're engaging in solo sex or masturbation and experiencing pain, how we communicate all of this with our partners if they're not sitting there watching with us, and then some support and resources, and hopefully have a fair chunk of time for Q&A. So, I mean, I don't need to bang on about this too much. I'm sure everyone is well aware that sexual pain is incredibly common when we have endo or other chronic pain conditions. And there's approximately this kind of 80% of those living with endo experience sexual difficulties, which is just a huge statistics. And we know that when there is sexual difficulties, there it has a big impact on reported quality of life scales. So the need for us to be able to look at not only supporting the chronic health management of chronic pelvic pain, but also look at how do we support people with sexual function, with arousal, desire, relationships is so vital rather than just the kind of management of pain. This is a huge other aspect that I'm really quite passionate about talking about and advocating for because it has an impact on quality of life. We know that pain has an impact on quality of life, of course, because it's a huge impact. We also know that sexual function and sexual satisfaction has an impact on quality of life. And so when I'm thinking about the overarching, I often talk about with people that we're looking at like three main goals here when we're treating sexual pain. And one of those is the penetration aspect of that sexual pain. This is what often people with their wonderful pelvic floor physios will work closely with. That idea of learning to relax the pelvic floor. They might be using things like dilators or Therawans or some sort of exposure to penetration. You might be looking at different positions and stretches and just other management around the chronic pain. I often find another goal that we want to work alongside that is this idea of getting partners involved because ultimately the thing that, particularly for heterosexual couples, is the partner's penis is one that is the thing doing the penetrating. And so we're wanting to get the partners involved with using things like the dilators or with touching and pleasure and just slowly engaging with that if you're not already doing so. And any relational based interventions because as soon as the partner gets involved, even if we've been able to do a lot of that dilator work and get to the largest one and thinking, yes, we can do this, that as soon as sometimes partners get involved, it's like this, oh, now I've got to pass this control. I'm not in complete control here. And that can be quite anxiety provoking for people when they've experienced sexual pain. The other part that I'll spend majority of today talking about is this idea around sexual pleasure, because there's lots of studies to suggest that we can get to achieve penetration in some way with physio exercises, but that doesn't actually change anything to do with sexual pleasure. And so often when I have clients working with a pelvic floor physio, I kind of leave them to be able to do some of that penetration-based work. And we focus on let's learn how to enjoy sex again. Let's build sexual pleasure and desire back in because after a while of experiencing pelvic pain and sexual pain, it kind of erodes a little bit. And how do we develop this real flexible, resilient sexual approach within our relationship or within ourselves so that when we are at a stage of being able to do penetration or we're wanting to shift and add this back in, we've already got this real good foundation of sexual pleasure, sexual flexibility, sexual resilience that this thing can kind of slip on in, no pun intended there. And so I often find that the sexual pleasure goal is the one that I start with, whilst physios might be working on some of those penetration-based goals. So when I'm thinking about treatment of sexual pain, that's kind of what I'm looking at, and we're working towards all of those, sometimes concurrently or pausing one and shifting to the other. So if we're thinking about sexual pleasure, we have to really talk about sexual myths because these sexual myths underpin a lot of what we feel we know about sex. I often tell people that sex is one of the things that everyone lies the most about. And I never ever trust anyone who is discussing their sex life over cocktails and brunch because our sex life is really, it's so varied. like our facial features are so varied that what one couple and person is doing is going to be very different to another. And yet there's this idea that there's this universal way in which people ought to be having sex, and that is so outdated and otherworld. We need to really chuck that out. And there are many myths that sit within that. But these are the three common ones I find come up a lot with clients when they have pelvic pain. So the first myth is this idea that good sex equals penetrative sex, orgasmic sex, spontaneous sex, that people are just doing it without even talking about it. And this myth is, I think, largely based on this like Hollywood version of sex that sets it up with having really unrealistic and unattainable expectations. And I mean, just the idea that everyone is penetratively orgasming at the same time without uttering a word, it's almost so preposterous. And yet, we don't ever see any depictions of realistic, long-term sexual relationships where there's like at least some lube involved or like conversations being had. It's just not what's shown. It's shown as lustful or sexless. And so, really, the solution to this kind of myth is that we need to really relearn a new model of what good sex is. That it's flexible, it's realistic, where there's resilience to life phases or health conditions, or even just the mood of the evening. And so, this first myth is one that I really work on kind of debunking and shifting in how we're engaging with that in our relationships or just even within ourselves. The second myth is that sex is penetrative intercourse. And so this often comes up that I'll be talking with people about what kind of sex do you and your partner have? Or they say, oh, we're not really having sex because sex in everyone's mind is penetrative intercourse. And this conclusion is so problematic because it limits us to what sex is and what sex isn't. It's almost like, well, if we didn't do penetration, then, well, we just didn't have sex. And I like to think that sex is so much more than just like a penis and vagina coming together for those in heterosexual relationships. And so here the solution that we often want to work on is redefining the term sex to be one that is a broad umbrella term that covers a range of sexual activity. I was thinking about an analogy for it. It's like, we talk about cleaning, and cleaning can encompass a really deep clean. Cleaning can encompass a little bit of dusting. It can also be turning the robo back on or just like moving things around to make it look presentable. All of those things we would refer to as cleaning. And so I kind of think we want to take the same approach with sex. Lots of things can be sex, not just penetrative intercourse. Another myth that I often hear is that if sex isn't working, well, then maybe we're just not sexually compatible. And I hear this a lot. Because it's this idea like, well, I'm not really feeling like it, and he or they always want it. And so when I kind of try to question or ask a little bit more about what's happening here, I often find there's very little communication happening between partners. There's really little knowledge around how sexual desire actually works, or the recognition of how I was sexual in my 20s is going to be very different to my 30s and 40s and so on. And I really understand this one because I don't think actually anyone is very well equipped with information because our sex education is so poor and we've got no realistic models of sexual relationships. And unless you're actually interested in sexology, then your Instagram algorithms aren't really pushing sex positive, evidence-based education material to you. And so beyond having like appropriate sexual education, communication and acceptance that other aspects of our relationship, like the sexual part, also needs work because it does actually evolve over time. The idea that it's going to stay the same and stay stagnant, or that we don't need to talk about it, or we're just compatible or we're not, is an outdated myth that I would like us to get rid of. So if we think about then that these are some myths and we're wanting to shift towards what do we do then? If we've kind of recognized that those things and those ideas and ways of being aren't working, what do we want to replace it with? And there's a few different models that I think piggyback off one another quite well that I wanted to have a little chat about. And one is this idea around sexual resilience and sexual flexibility. And this model here was developed with the idea of sexual concerns following cancer treatment, but I think it's actually really applicable to all of us because we are all going to have to overcome or shift or be flexible in our sexual style one way or another across our lifespan. And I think when we're thinking about within this model, endo-related sexual pain often becomes framed as an individual problem. The sexual pain is their problem. But this Reese's and colleagues' flexible coping model kind of asks us to see it as a relational stressor, as a dyadic stressor that affects both partners and is shaped and influenced by how we respond together to that pain. So, whilst one person is experiencing the pain, how it impacts us sexually is us together. And there is a lot to this model. And so I've really kind of, I suppose I've kind of watered it down as best as I can. Otherwise, we'd be talking about this all evening and then we never get to the good stuff. So if we think that sexual resilience, we're not aiming here for the absence of pain, because it's something that we may or may not have much control over, depending on how often we may have flares. But what we are trying to develop is our relational or our couple's capacity to adapt to the pain or adapt to the shifts in these flares. And so this includes having flexible sexual scripts to broaden that definition of sex beyond penetration, performance, orgasm. And when we can shift from real sex equates to intercourse, like I was talking about before, it gives us this really expansive view of intimacy. And when we expand that view to look at all the different ways in which we can engage in sex, what we find is that distress reduces, and actually our avoidance towards sexual intimacy also softens. Another aspect here is this shared appraisal as interpersonal context. So when a problem is framed as our challenge rather than your body is the problem, shame decreases, collaborative coping increases. And there's been a bunch of research on relational coping that shows that emotional validation and responsiveness buffers sexual distress and protects relationship satisfaction, even when there's ongoing pain. So when we as a couple approach this as our challenge, our problem, our thing to figure out how we are going to connect sexually, how we are going to maintain sexual closeness, rather than your pain, your body, this is your thing to sort out, we actually work better as a couple. We feel less shame, and feel more satisfied in our relationship. And so really what we are wanting to do when I'm working with people is, along with like managing pain and managing the anxiety that sits with pain, is help couples or individuals maintain connection and shared meaning whilst navigating endo. Okay, so that's all well and good to say. And yes, let's be more resilient, Hilary, good idea. But what next? Because we don't know what we don't know. So let's think about some sex ed, and if we can maybe start on this same page, then the rest of what we do from here can kind of help. So first and foremost, desire and arousal are not the same thing. Desire is this psychological or physiological state of wanting, interested in being sexual. And arousal is the psychological and physiological state of being turned on. I kind of think desire is this thing that can be on a spectrum. So I can be mildly interested, maybe a little bit open, and then I can be like yearning for something. I really want it. And arousal is something that can build and drop and build again. But they're different concepts. Sometimes they co-occur. Sometimes the thing that I want to be sexual, I'm also turned on. Sometimes they do co-occur. But there is this expectation that I see often that if I am not turned on, then I mustn't want sex. Or if I want sex, then I must also be turned on. But because the two don't align, then what we can end up doing is, well, I'm not turned on, so therefore my partner initiates and it's a no. And yet I think in many other aspects of our relationship, the idea that these two things might not be aligned, or that my partner might desire something more than I do at this point in time, is normal. And I think the prime example that I often use, time and time again, is like if we have meal prepped all week and then your partner comes home and is like, oh my God, I've been craving pizza. Bloody Joan heated leftovers up in the lunchroom and it's all I've been thinking about all day. And you're thinking, oh, yeah, I suppose I could be open for a pizza. Yeah, it's a good idea. Don't have to do dishes then. Yeah, right, sure, order it. And then as we've ordered it and I'm thinking about it and it's arriving and now the smell and my body is salivating and I'm eating and I'm thinking, God, yes, this pizza is bloody fantastic. I mean, just prior you didn't have pizza on your mind, but you're open to it and then your body was like, yeah, what a bloody good idea that was. And so I kind of think about desire and how I respond to an initiation is less so yes, no, but how open, how willing am I to being sexual and seeing if my body or my arousal system responds. That's my way of explaining it. I think then if we think about it through this like more um, proper terminology, I suppose, rather than my pizza analogy, is this idea of responsive versus spontaneous sexual desire. So this spontaneous sexual desire is this like interest that just appears out of the blue prior to any sexual stimulation. It's like more common maybe in early relationships or when we are teenagers and we've got our hormones pumping. But it's often thought of as like the normal or the only pathway to desire and then arousal. And so then if this spontaneous desire is normal, then if I don't have that, then I don't have any desire or I have a libido problem, is what we're often left with, because there is no conversation really anywhere around this idea of responsive desire. And this is where sexual interest emerges after erotic stimulation, after emotional closeness or intentional engagement. And this pattern's really common in long-term relationships and is entirely normal. The idea that I've been at work all day and then I come home and my partner's like, hey, do you want to get in the bedroom, love? I'm like, oh, man, I haven't even had a shower yet. I've even not said hi to you yet. What do you mean? That I might need to have some connection, some moment to come relax in the shower before my desire kind of starts to pique its interest. And so then once I've decided if I'm open or desiring, this is where then arousal models come in. And the dual control model is a really good one because it's how responsive our body is shaped by this excitatory process, these like accelerators that increase arousal and inhibitory processes. So these brakes that dampen arousal. And all of us differ so much in how sensitive these systems are, and context can influence which system may dominate in any given moment. So context like stress, pain, relational safety, fatigue, etc. And so when we've had pain or fear of pain or the experience of disappointment or distress around sexual difficulties, it's a real foot on the brake. Even when we might find our partner still attractive, or we might still be open to being sexual, it's hard to get our arousal system going when we're worrying about pain. Whereas if we increase safety, increase in positive anticipation, clear boundaries, communication, pleasure-focused activity, we can put the foot on the accelerator and help boost and maintain that arousal. The other parts that also have an impact on desire and arousal in general are mental health and other kind of conditions. So, like ADHD and ASD and other neurodivergencies, these have an impact because of the way brains kind of process information, right? So, for someone with ADHD, let's say, we might consider structuring the environment in a way that the brain can notice or stay focused or build pleasure. So we know, for instance, that orgasm to reach climax requires this sustained kind of building of arousal. So the foot needs to stay on the accelerator. And so for some people with ADHD, they're using things like toys that provide consistent or predictable stimulation can be easier for someone with ADHD to hold on to the arousal building rather than lots of sensory shifts. If they're kind of on it, they're off it, they're on it, they're off it kind of thing. Or for someone where there's lots of sensory overwhelm, that giving ourselves permission to structure the room, set the room right, like aircon playing, music, sexy playlist to prompt the brain to stay on sexy time, lube ready to go, etc. And depression, anxiety, and medication also have an impact, as well as trauma. Sexual trauma in particular can have an impact because it actually sends signals to the body in our fight and flight that this isn't safe. And so I kind of think about, if anyone's been in a car accident, their fight and flight system is going to be alert in the aftermath when they're driving again. because our body primes us to possible dangers, even if everyone around us is driving really safely. And when our fight and flight system is active, that is a strong foot on the brake of arousal systems, which is okay because we can learn that sexual activity in this context is safe by having safe and pleasurable focused sexual activity whilst also working on trauma processing. In the same way, I can learn and my body can learn that I can relax and not anticipate pain. And my fight and flight doesn't need to be active by focusing on flexible, communicative, pleasure-focused sexual activity, whilst also working on supporting my chronic pelvic pain. The two work side by side in tandem. All right, so with all that knowledge that resilience and shifting focus to an us approach, and we broaden this definition, and we know that desire and arousal aren't the same thing. We know that we can have different brakes and accelerators, and then what? And then this is where I think this model, the good enough sex model, really helps us break down what actually good sex looks like. The good enough sex model shifts away from this like all or nothing sexual patterns that all touch must lead to intercourse to move to something that's pleasure focused, realistic, and has four key components: desire, pleasure, eroticism, and satisfaction. I think I've done the desire bit already, so we'll leave that and I'll move on to the pleasure. And ultimately, if we kind of strip all of this bit of the model down to the bare bones, pleasure is that good sex prioritizes the giving and receiving and sharing of pleasure. And I mean, gosh, at the heart of it, isn't that what we all want sex to be? To feel good, right? That's the whole point of it, beyond, maybe conception, if, that you're that way inclined. And so within this model, we recognize that there are so many different ways we can give and receive pleasure. There are so many different ways we can actually touch one another. And so when I think about sexual pleasure and ways of being sexual, the ways of having sex, all of these different ways of touch is sex. That we have this affectionate, sensual sex, we have this playful touch, we have this erotic touch, we have solo sex. But yet, if you see there that in erotic touch is the only place that has intercourse. And so if the only way that couples experience sexual pleasure or connection is with erotic touch, then it's so limiting and places so much pressure on that one dimension of touch. Whereas if we're engaging in all of these different ways to experience sexual pleasure and experience touch, then what we're doing is investing more regularly and we feel more connected. And there's a book that's a fantastic book called Wonderful Sex. I've got it in the resource section. And this is research done on long-term couples who are having magnificent sex. It's called Magnificent Sex. And the researchers there found that those who are having magnificent sex all say that pleasure is the most important thing. It doesn't matter what they're doing, what the activity is, it's about connection and about pleasure above all else. That is what allows them to have magnificent sexual experiences. The other way I kind of think about this, and I've talked about this kind of in this way before, is like a buffet. And so if one activity meal isn't available, well, I mean, I don't know about you, but if I'm at a buffet, I'm overfilling my plate on absolutely everything I can get my hands on, and I'm coming back for seconds. The buffet is still flippin' delicious, even if one dish isn't available. And so the idea that if I can't do this one thing, then I can't be sexual, is really limiting. I think I've made that clear, right? And so when we're looking at this like affectionate touch, it's this like washing each other in the shower and not this like, oh, hey, I've got that mud from gardening on my back. Can you get in there and scrub it off? But actually being close with one another, actually washing one another, engaging with one another, breathing together. This kind of playful touch is, maybe that showering scene again, but maybe now we're just like playing with the nipples a little bit while we're washing, or maybe we're just like sneakily rubbing the vulva slightly. That it's playful, it's not kind of setting up camp in vulva or with partner's penis if they have one. Maybe it's that we're like reading some erotica together, or I've kind of squeezed your hand and given you a little flirty wink as I've walked by, or I've sent you a bit of flirty text. This erotic touch is where we kind of turn up maybe that arousal a little bit more. Maybe erotic touch may lead to climax or orgasm, but it's that kind of kissing that builds with intensity. It's this like energy that we're kind of building there. It's touching genitals, but not just setting up camp there, actually spending time with the body building arousal. It can include things like oral sex, direct stimulation, toys, etc. I'll come back to solo sex in a second when I talk about masturbation, but I think it's important that we recognize that there is a whole way in which we can engage sexual pleasure that is just with me, myself, and I, that is as valid as all partnered activity. To finish off the good enough sex model, I also want to make a note on this idea of eroticism because ultimately it's really just referring to this like intense feeling or energy, these heightened levels of arousal. Um, and we can engage in this kind of mindset of eroticism when there's mutual respect. There's the ability to say yes or no to the suggested activity. I think unfortunately eroticism has got a bit of a bad association with this idea of like pushing limits, breaking boundaries. And for some, I mean, gosh, the kinky element of eroticism might be part of the erotic experience. But I also know that like vanilla, scheduled Sunday sexual activity can be incredibly erotic because it's the energy, the connectedness, the feeling of together that people are bringing when they are giving and receiving and building pleasure. Satisfaction is pretty straightforward and just refers to the idea that whatever we've done is satisfying and connecting. And the more satisfying, what do you know? The more it reinforces desire. Because if I feel satisfied and like that was a nice experience, I'm going to want to do it more. And I think the thing here, this idea of satisfaction can, I don't know, sometimes have this idea of it needs to be like good. It was like we both came, it was problem free, and then it was satisfying. But I think realistically, if we think about the resilience, like I was talking about before, that things can be satisfying even if they didn't really work. We had to pivot because of something, like the cat scratching on the door or something. And in like the way that we pivot, the way that we approach whatever difficulty came up is what allows us to stay connected. Did we do that with humor? Did we do that with validation? Did we do that with a sense of togetherness? That allows the pivot to maintain. This was still a good experience. Like we went in there, we gave it a go. It was a bit awkward. Cat kept scratching. Neighbor started mowing. We both lost it. We couldn't kind of stay focused again, but we gave it a go. The humor, the togetherness that we were in this together. And so when I often talk about this model and these ideas with people, I kind of like to reinforce that if your sexual activity or your sex, as we're now going to refer to it from here on out, had these four elements, then you have had good sex. And maybe like if there hasn't been eroticism for a while, maybe there's been like lots of flares, lots of intervention, long history of sexual pain. Maybe we're starting off with some of that more sensual or playful touch. But even then, if we're starting with sensual or playful touch, there hasn't been anything particularly erotic, but you felt satisfied and you felt connected, then you have also had good sex. Because there was this sharing of pleasure, there was this intention of coming together, and that's at the heart of it. So I think there's an important point to think about in terms of solo sex and masturbation, because realistically, like listening to how your body responds and experiences pleasure is fundamental for sexual enjoyment. And research on sexual arousal continues to show that when we understand the types of touch, the pace, the pressure, the fantasy, or the themes of eroticism, the context that we like to respond to, when we know this stuff, it helps to support and build arousal. And turns out building arousal leads to climax. But it also helps to improve communication with our partners because as our enjoyment and pleasure evolves, we also have to communicate that with our partners. And I think unfortunately, masturbation gets depicted as like it's direct clitoral stimulation with the aim of a rapid climax. And I'm sure there's probably some, you know, patriarchal reason as to why that is, of, that's how the other side do it, maybe. But in reality, I mean, when I think about masturbation, it's this giving and receiving of pleasurable touch for oneself. And it can include whole body touch, breath, movement, fantasy, sensory exploration. And so when I'm working with clients who have difficulty reaching climax, I often ask them to stop touching their vulva and clitoris, slow down, engage in foreplay with yourself. It might be like, let's listen and watch fantasies. Watch fantasies, listen to erotica, watch porn, engage in fantasies, whatever kind of stimulation you might like, and start massaging your body and listen to where your body wants to be touched next. Slow down your breath and notice, does this feel good? Am I wanting more pressure, less pressure, faster touch, slower touch? Is there any part of my body that I want to explore? And am I kind of getting turned on here? And if I am getting turned on, then to like stay there and lean into that sense of noticing arousal. It might be the first flickers of arousal and just stay there. But do not go straight for the clitoris when you start to feel turned on because it puts all this pressure on, like, now I've got to get there. And remember, we're slowing this down, we're building pressure, we're getting to know ourselves again. And so, if anything, it's like as I start to get turned on, maybe my hand and my body's wanting, it's like pulling me to, vulva or clitoris. And so let's slow that down. We can explore the thighs, we can explore the mons, your butt maybe, tease the vulva a little bit. Um, but realistically, we want arousal to be pretty heightened, like maybe like a 6 out of 10, maybe, before clitoral stimulation even begins. And even then, we don't need to just go there and set up camp. Engage in it, move on, come back, and obviously, like, reapply lube over and over again. Lube is there for everyone's friend. Um, because as soon as we put pressure on reaching climax or pressure on, I need to get turned on or I need to make sure this feels good, we spook the climax, we spook the pleasure, we spook the sense of learning about our body. And so if you have difficulty reaching climax, getting some support around this can be really helpful. Or if you're not sure where to start learning how to engage in your body again, getting some support around this can be very helpful. So then we can learn how to communicate what you like and how you like it with your partner if you're partnered. So let's say we're partnered and we want to talk about this stuff with our partner. And understandably, when we have pelvic pain, this can end up being like the center of the experience because we're focusing, is it going to hurt? Is it going to hurt? Partner initiates something, we might immediately say, no, 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 because we don't want to feel pain or we don't want to have negative outcomes like disappointment or there's uncertainty. And so I really think, how can we shift initiation from being this like gatekeeper or shying away from uncertainty by saying no? And how can we shift it to be this idea of a bid for connection where we can both put a bid out and seek to feel connected, prioritized, desired, and heard? Where we can have that conversation around, how would you like to be approached? Where we can talk about the importance of validating the intention for connection rather than just shutting down the desire, which can create distance. And so an example of that might sound like, person initiating might sound like, hey, I'm kind of in the mood to connect with you. How about you? Or like a bit of a winky text with it, in the mood, hey? And as we're responding to that, let's use more words rather than fewer. I'm not so sure. I like the idea of spending time together. Can we just cuddle and see where it goes? Or I've been having a bit of a flare up but I want to still feel connected with you. Could we maybe go have a shower and kiss? And I'd just like to see how my body responds to that. We want to be able to say, I don't know, let's see. And because we've got all that really good, flexible knowledge and different ways of touching, we've got all this way of negotiating and initiation rather than it being yes, no. But I think the other part of this, that for this to work, beyond the ability to be able to say yes and no, needs to be very clear. And there has to be lots of conversation around what do we do. We also need to see our partner's desire as valid and welcome. It needs to be okay that our partner may get more aroused. If we're showering, we may see them get erect. We may see them show signs of arousal. Um, it's okay for our partner to want to be more sexual than where we're currently at in our relationship. It's all right for our partner to want to enjoy intercourse. And these things are okay because sex isn't a need. It's not like air and water and food and shelter. It's a want, And it can be a yearning for connection and closeness. And to be honest, most partners who I've actually worked with, when I ask them around like what sex is or what they miss, it's this like they talk about missing feeling desired and wanted and physically close and just not sure how to navigate that because they don't want to put pressure on their partner around it. And I'd say most of the time, 9 times out of 10, let's say, they might express this desire for sexual activity. And when I ask, like, what do you mean by that? It's, if we can have sexual activity that's enjoyable for both, maybe not penetrative, but enjoyable, or just penetrative sex, which one are we wanting here? And 9 times out of 10, they're wanting sexual activity that is desirable, that is pleasurable, that is something that we're engaging with togetherness rather than this like penetrativeness. And I think even when I've spoken to people where there has been the focus on penetrative intercourse, it's either that they don't really understand sexual function, they don't have much sexual knowledge, don't really have a good way of communicating what penetration means for them, or unfortunately, at sometimes it has been partners prioritizing their own desire over their partners. But more often than not, when partners are supportive, it's that they want to feel close and connected, and we just don't know how to navigate that together. So when we're communicating, I think we can recognize this idea of like intent and impact, that we can see different truths by looking at the same action from different points of view. So this idea of like initiating sexual activity, partner could be having the intent of, I want to feel physically close and connected. And the way they're initiating it, albeit may not be the smoothest, maybe we can work on that. But the impact is, oh, they just want to get off. I can tell they're just so horny. They're just focusing on that because we're missing this intent and impact. How we're actually initiating or how our partner's initiating isn't landing with us. And maybe we haven't communicated or figured out a way of communicating or understanding intent versus impact. Likewise, it's like cuddling in the kitchen and maybe partners expressing attraction and they're thinking, oh, I just want to express how attractive my partner is. Like, I love them so much. And maybe the impact of that is, oh, they're just buttering me up to get me in the mood. And so if we shift the initiation idea to a bit of connection, then we can see that action with that intent and respond to that intent with connection. So that idea of suggesting a massage, maybe the intent is it's been a while since I felt close to my partner. And if we see that action with that same intent of closeness and connection, the impact might be, oh God, I'm so glad they suggested that. It has been a while since we've been close. But again, all of this only works when there's shared respect, the ability to say yes or no without consequence, experience and flexible sexual activity, that there's good communication around how we initiate, negotiate, and there's a willingness to see how we respond. And so if like any of this has sparked your curiosity, and if I were going to set up a conversation with my partner, I'd be finding the right time, I'd be coming with notes, I'd be discussing what is the meaning and purpose of sex in our relationship. And maybe I'd be asking some of these questions. We'd be taking time to breathe. We'd be validating each other's emotions. We'd be questioning the other person to understand. We wouldn't be assuming what they're saying. And if we get stuck, we'd stop, we'd come back, we might even get some support. And so really like the first space for any of this is communicate. I find that couples, once they develop a really good way of communicating and understanding what sex means for them and how they want to express it, then they can really start this experience of like satisfying varied sexual activity. And once that ball is rolling, it like really snowballs. And it maintains and feeds itself because the things we enjoy doing, turns out we want to do them more. And so if it has been a while, I think the things is to like give ourselves permission to maybe increase the certainty to allow then for a bit more playfulness. So for instance, let's make it really planned. Let's decide on a date night. Let's agree on the various activities that might be available that evening. What's our sexual menu that we can choose from? And then we can lean into and build this anticipatory excitement with like flirty texts, fantasizing about it, massage, relaxation, getting in the mood. Because ultimately, if we're reducing the pressure, it helps to increase connectedness. So what feels comfortable? Let's start there. Let's get creative. What's going to be on your menu? How do we kind of get a little menu together? Allow it to feel silly and awkward. Pretend it's your first time that you've seen one another, you know? Allow it not to feel quite right. If something's not quite right, they're not doing it, then, you can take their hand and show them how you might like it. It's okay to feel nervous. Um, Keeping in mind, nervousness is sometimes a similar sensation to excitement, depending on the mind state that we're in. And ultimately, let's talk, 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 so that we stay connected, regardless of how the experience goes. And if in doubt, see a professional. I think particularly being able to see a professional if any of these conversations with partners leads to conflict. If there's been like anxiety or trauma or other factors, means it's hard to stay focused. If there's sexual avoidance or distance has been around for a long time and it's kind of where do we even start? Or maybe there's fertility challenges that have impacted sexual function. Or maybe there's even the recognition that actually both of us or one of us has really maybe some stuck views of all or nothing views or myths around sex. Getting some support to kind of shift that can be really helpful. And actually, I sometimes also think, people, when there's pelvic pain, people who experience that, they have to carry so much themselves, right? Like we've got to go to the physio, the dietitian, the gynae, the GP, everyone, that I also don't think we need to have any gold stars or kudos for trying to manage or carry something like this on your own. There are times I might see people for like 2 sessions, 3 sessions, we're doing some education or challenging some myths or problem solving some difficulties. Other times, maybe we're working for some time or unpacking a lot of interrelated factors or anything in between. That things don't have to be really wrong to get some support if we're just kind of coming up with a little bit of a barrier and not sure how to overcome it. There's great support available. And some of these supports can be like there's a bunch of books here that I've listed, and there's some apps. Our website has a whole bunch of free resources and blogs and information. So any of these are really useful. But that's the end of me. So I'm not sure if there are any questions or if anything, people had questions at all.
That is so good, Hilary. So every now and then my husband sort of like popped his head in. So hopefully he's taken a few notes. If not, he's going to be rewatching this, that's for sure. I wondered whether anyone else had any questions or comments um, for Hilary. If you don't feel comfortable with sharing them in the chat or the Q&A, what we might do is if you email us info@qendo.org.au, I'll put together a bit of a
Yeah, good idea.
questions, and then that way we can, turn that, into something for the people who have joined in tonight. That might be a good way, if anyone has any questions and not quite, confident to put
Yeah,
hands
of
up and things
course,
like that.
absolutely.
So I think, unless Hilary, you've got anything else to add, to share?
It's nothing that comes to mind. I'm not sure.
That
It's
is totally fine. So, anyone, if you're looking to book in Hilary, obviously you can find her at the Center for Relationship, I'm gonna,
relational and sexual well-being. It's a bit of a
that's
mouthful,
the
but yes.
one. Thank you. Oh, we have a Q&A. Oh, I like this one. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm an endo patient who is postpartum and finding sex particularly hard now as she feels touched out. Any
Yes.
advice? Now, as a mum of two
Yes.
boys, I'm glad this person
Yeah,
has
great
shared this
question.
because that is a wonderful question. Hilary,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, gosh, is that feeling of being touched out is so real, isn't it? It's like if one more person puts their hands on me, I am going to scream. Absolutely. I think there's this the another analogy I sometimes use is when we think about like in the midst of parenting, I am in caretaker mode. I am caring, I'm caring, I'm caring, I'm caring. And that caretaker mode is the thankfully opposite to sexy mode. Those two don't live side by side, right? And so if I think about like a floor plan, caretaker mode is one end of the house, sexy mode is the other end of the house. So, what rooms do I need to move between to get to sexy mode? And how does my relationship or my support systems allow that? Because I have to go from often caretaker mode, mum mode, to connect with me as individual adult human to sexy mode. I can't just jump that. Like there is no like teleportation to the other state, right? I wish, right? But what what are the things that allow me to connect to me? What are the things then, if I think about that responsive desire, what are the things that cue me into sexy time? So I've got to cue me into me first. That might be like, hey, I'm doing bedtimes. I got it. I got it, honey. Don't worry. Baby will cry. I got it. Sorted. You go have a shower. I've run you a bath. You go have a bath. Go for a run, leave the house, do whatever. And then when I come back and I've like connected with me, how do I connect to my partner? Maybe it's like emotional closeness. So do we sit down and talk? Do we play a board game? Do we like look back through funny photos? Like what are the things that allows us to connect together that might help me move into sexy time room? Sometimes it'll work, sometimes that won't. I think it depends on how old your kids are, is how predictable that'll be. Um, but I think first and foremost, we have to shift from care mode to connect with me to be anywhere near sexy time room. Um, and that takes support from our partner, but also intentional mind shifts for ourselves. I think the other thing is like, what am I doing in sexy time room? Like maybe how we used to be sexy isn't how we can be sexy now. Maybe it is like what are ways that pleasure is like attended to one person and take turns? Is it that we're just like having naked time together because gosh, it's been a while since we've actually been able to cuddle up together that feels different to like cuddling in other ways in the day. So again, that flexibility when we're in sexy time room, what are we actually doing? Would be the other thing I'd think about as well. That would be like a very short answer to that.
That's yeah, such a good question. And there's so many that, and like living with endo as well, like you've got to try and work out how on earth that feels. Have I been in a flare? Is this going to flare me more?
Yeah, for
And like
sure.
getting your whole mind around, is this, and it takes back to that, is that worth it? Do I want to do this? All of that. So
Mhm.
great question. Great.
Yeah, good question.
Um, Wonder if anyone else has any more questions they want to throw out to us. Maybe not, but that's okay. We can finish with that a superb question.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank you.
Hilary, so much
No
for
problems.
bringing this session to us, bringing the session to the wider community,
Of
to
course.
really know that there is support and education and acknowledgement that we can actually talk about painful sex. Like not, just hiding it away in the corner and
Yeah,
pretending it isn't a thing. We can absolutely talk about it. We
yeah,
should absolutely talk about it. And
I know.
it's been a real pleasure to hear you
Of
speak
course, always a pleasure.
and so excited. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And everyone can have the rest of their night back. Go and have a
Thank
nice
you.
shower.
Enjoy. I'll just sit and breathe for a moment.
Yeah, just have a few moments.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. You have a wonderful night.
Thanks. Bye.